Hello, welcome to another episode of the Low Code Café. This is episode number 162 for May 22nd, 2024. Today we're going to talk about Parallel Gateway and how you can use that to fast track your workflows. That's a new feature in version 1.26. And in order to do that, we'll touch on a lot of things. We'll build a workflow and an API endpoint, and we'll call it using the parallel gateway. So you'll get a taste of a lot of things in this one episode. Let me introduce myself. I am Dale Warner, Head of Support for Plant an App. I'm joined today in the background, Patrick Anderson, ready to bail me out when I get into trouble. He's a Technical Success Manager for Plant an App. And so let's see, this is a event that we do on Wednesdays, every other Wednesdays at 10 a.m. Central Time this hour. And so it's just an opportunity for us to provide updates and demos and hands-on low coding. That's where we try to spend the most amount of our time. So this is tends to be a technical webinar. But from time to time, we have guest speakers. That's been some of our best episodes when people have come in and shown us what they've built with Plant an App. So reach out to us if you have something that you think that would benefit the community as a whole. We put all these out on YouTube, so youtube.com/plantanap, and so now there's 161 very good hours of training content, and you're invited to sign up for those, subscribe, get the alerts as soon as those get posted. We tend to post these one day after they are recorded. Today we'll be doing a brief from the trenches of support segment, and then following up with the majority of this will be hands-on low coding dedicated to Parallel Gateway. As a matter of housekeeping, our next presentation is due 2 weeks from today. That'll be our next live webinar, June 5th, and that will be led by Patrick Anderson. He has a great topic for you, so do jump in on that. We are soon to release our next version of Plant an App. We are currently on version 1.25. We are releasing 1.26, and the current official release date is soon. We've been talking over these last several episodes about the new features that are going to be in there, and I'm going to call attention today to two. In workflows, there is this new feature, parallel gateways, and we'll be covering that in depth. And then one that I found out about just today, the optional automatic creation of APIs, I thought was worth a mention. It's a nice addition to what we do. So if you have entities and you create a new entity or even edit an existing entity, we've got now this new API access switch box, and by default, when you're creating something new, it'll be turned off. You can turn it on or off. And what this does is in our APIs section, we automatically build endpoints that allow you to create, read, update, and delete records out of your database. Oftentimes you don't need this. And so if you're not publishing your data by way of an API endpoint, you can turn this off or leave it turned off, and that just it helps in that it doesn't create a bunch of APIs that aren't being used. So we've had people that comment that that's a better security scenario, but it's also an efficiency. It runs a little bit faster when it doesn't have to create those things. So a nice new feature that's going to be in there. We haven't mentioned that one for today. So again, that's soon, probably next week, but watch your email for an announcement from us on that one. So now on to our From the Trenches of Support segment. We have 3 more hotfixes. We've previously released 97 because version 1.25 has been a particularly long one. So we've got 3 more, and so that brings us to an even 100 hotfixes. And so if you need these or just want these, you're welcome to install them. You'll see them in the updates section of your Plant an App configuration menu. So there is an enhancement, and this was probably the most useful one that's on this list. we had when we save when you upload something to an entity like a spreadsheet or a PDF file or whatever, and it gets stored away into the file system. The if the folder permissions, in certain cases, the folder permissions would get modified, and while those modifications perhaps should have taken 6 or 8 seconds to do just on if you were doing it manually within the content management system, it was taking a minute and a half under plant and app. So we found an efficiency issue and resolved it. So if you're seeing long delay times when you're trying to save an entity and you're uploading content, that could be the issue. Could be solved by this hotfix. We also found a small thing where if you were adding on a form, if you're adding agreement links to a form and you didn't configure it correctly, it would throw an error. And you're supposed to have the terms are part of a core part of an agreement link, but if you didn't put terms in there, it would let you save it and then it would throw an error. So that's a convenience thing, keeping it from throwing an error, I guess, while you're in development. And then the last one, and I guess this is also pretty important, our redirect toolkit had, if you were installing higher versions of the product and also installing the newer version of DNN 9.10 plus, it would throw an error. So with this hotfix, it will now prevent that particular error from being thrown if you're upgrading and installing DNN at the same time. So definitely worth installing. And again, we highly recommend that all of these bug fixes for all the hotfixes for 1.25 get installed before you install version 1.26. So you should just put that on your radar for things to get done at least during that install time. That recommendation will be part of what we send as well. So we invite you to engage in our other weekly meeting. It's the Low Code Campfire. It's Fridays this same hour, and we do that every Friday, except holidays, I guess. And it's just an opportunity to come together with other low coders, and it's more of a meeting format. We do real-time problem solving. We talk about the kinds of things that happened in the Low Code Cafe in a little bit more depth. So it's just a nice community of users, and we do that again every Friday, 10 a.m. Central. So do join us. We have links for the episode. Patrick has put those on there. I can see out of the corner of my eye already. So you can register in advance for the Low Code Campfire. You can get access to our YouTube channel, the community portal, which is a great place to ask questions and suggest features. And then you can give feedback on what you thought about this event with our webinar feedback form. Okay, so with that, we reserve the majority of this for hands-on low coding, and we'll be talking about parallel gateways and fast tracking your workflows. So the question is, what are we doing? I want to talk about what the parallel gateway feature is as a whole and when it would be beneficial to you, and we'll demonstrate the feature, and we'll actually implement the feature as part of something that makes a little bit of sense as just kind of a backdrop to understand the feature. So within workflows, this would be a typical workflow sequence. You have a start, you have something that's going on. Maybe we're creating an invoice. At the same time, after the invoice gets created, we are getting a delivery estimate. So this would be like in a scenario where your site delivers products. It lets people order things. So you create an invoice, get a delivery estimate, and then at the very end, you send them an email saying what you providing the invoice and the delivery estimate. So all these things have to happen, and prior to 1.26, they would just happen in a sequential way. And so if creating an invoice took 5 seconds and getting a delivery estimate took 5 seconds, maybe take a second or two to send an email. So this whole thing, you've got a client hanging on, they've pushed a button and this workflow is running. This whole thing might take 12 seconds. With a parallel gateway, you can define things a little differently, and this is exactly what we're going to do today, where you use the split for parallel gateway. And so you could define that you process A, the create invoice, is one thing on the split. Process B, delivery estimate. Those things get executed, and then when everything is completed, we merge back together into one spot. You could have many more than just the two things here, but this is for illustration. And so the outputs from process A and process B are going to be available when you send the client email. So gives you, if again, this takes 5 seconds and this takes 5 seconds, you might get through this whole gateway in 5 or 6 seconds now, because these two things are happening at the same time. And so now you're sending your email. And so you're shaving off some real time because you're putting processing to work for you. So that's the whole point about parallel gateway. By the way, I didn't mention, but you can throw questions on the question and answer section, and we'll be happy to identify, to deal with questions along the way, or as they're called to my attention. So, parallel gateway, when would it be beneficial? Just like I just illustrated, it's great for when you have multiple independent processes, two or three things that need to happen all at once, and you need to do something more after they're all complete. And the point would be that you want to do some elapsed time. Now, if it's shorter time, you've got a user hanging on, waiting for that workflow to that would be one reason, one benefit. Things to think about: if nobody's waiting on the results of this, and you're not concerned about the time, it might be better to code it in the first way, without a parallel gateway, because when you use a parallel gateway, wherever the processing is taking place, you're now causing the system to do two things at once. If you have hundreds of users and everybody's doing everything at once, your system could get bogged down. So it could be a result in resource spikes. Lots of times that's not something that you worry about. But if you don't need it, there's no real benefit to putting in a parallel gateway. And then there's if you're in the middle of a workflow and you need something else to happen that you don't want to wait for, but you don't care when it gets done, then there's another tool, execute actions asynchronously, that would let you get something else started, and it'll run away in the background, but it won't impede the progress of your current workflow. So using that action might be beneficial. Again, if you don't need to wait for the results of it, it's just something that needs to happen. So that's gives you an idea of when you might want to use it. So let's take a look at how we're going to demonstrate this feature. My scenario is, and this is a very real scenario, we at PlantinApp have many systems, and you're aware of some of them. So there is the three that I'm going to talk about today. There's our community website that you might have an account on. There's our console, which is where you manage your apps and your subscriptions and create support tickets. That's really the most important function, right? Creating support tickets. And then the third site we'll talk about is the Low Code Campfire website, which is a shared community site where you can contribute low code that might benefit other people. So the scenario that we have is that we want to create a kind of holistic view of all of your participation on these sites. If you have placed some community forum posts or helped answer some community forum posts. If you have an account on console and some information about how many organizations you belong to, for example, and then you've made some contributions on the Campfire website as well. All of those things, we want to see that holistic picture. And so what we're designing then is, and what I already have in place, is that we have an API on our community website that will give us an answer, a snapshot of your participation or my participation in community. Got the same kind of an API endpoint that does the same thing on our console application. We're going to build the API that returns information about your participation in Campfire, and then we're bringing that all together to do a snapshot on our CRM system. Our CRM system is actually called our GTM system. You'll see that here in a little bit, but we'll get one snapshot that includes your participation in all these places. So it's just bringing information together so that we can get a higher overview. That's our scenario. When we get into it, we will switch over to a parallel gateway. And so instead of asking those questions one at a time, we'll ask the CRM system will ask each of these APIs to respond back and give a snapshot. And so we'll be able to assemble when we get all of the information back, we'll be able to assemble it into a snapshot. That's where we're going. So what have I already built? We have on our CRM system, we have a contact details snapshot form, and I already have a workflow that is get all these contact snapshots based on email. And so let's see what that looks like. Let's see, closing out things I don't need. So this is our, I'm going to refresh this to make sure it's alive, but this is our CRM system, and we have, bringing up my record, we have details, we have all the emails that I've been part of, and then lots of different things, what companies I'm connected with. But this is where we're going to display the snapshot. And so I have a Get Snapshot button, and I've got some extra things on here just for the purpose of this Low Code Cafe to show how things work. And I also want to show, I'm going to edit the snapshot form, and so I didn't get something prepared before for our work today, so let's get that taken care of now. I have in preparation actually already developed this Campfire thing, but we'll redevelop it here. So I'm going to take those out. We're not supposed to yet have a Campfire response from our metrics. So let's do that again. See, it's giving me the snapshot from community, console, Campfire. It's not really supposed to be there yet, so I'm going to try that again. All this button does is run the workflow and takes the results of the workflow and displays it. And finishes here. Yeah, so this is what I had intended to only show what we have built already. So we're getting a result from Community Portal that has how many forum posts have I done and how many times have I answered on somebody else's post and how many of my answers were accepted. Somebody's downvoting my answers. I don't quite understand that, but okay. And then from console, I am members of 3 different organizations on the console. It doesn't really matter what this is. Just realize that this is a response back from these remote, these API calls that we're doing. From a timing perspective, I'm displaying the Unix time when you click the button. each of these APIs is also returning the Unix time from when they get started. And so this is going to help us illustrate, once we've got Parallel Gateway going, that that these are going to be starting at the same time. But what we're seeing now is it started at 62 seconds. It the That's when we click the button. The community portal started at 62 seconds, but because this console one is designed to happen after the community portal one, this took 3 seconds to do, so this started 3 seconds later. Console is also taking 3 seconds to do, so the total end time is 3 seconds after that. And so this total thing is taking about 6 seconds. All right, that's what we've got going on. If we were to look behind the scenes a little bit, this is the form. We have a get snapshot button. All it does is we're gathering a little bit of information, but its main processing is that it's passing the email address of the person that I care about to this consolidated contact snapshot by email workflow. It's getting out the metrics. Metrics is actually coming out from this HTML output. So it's already formed. This workflow is returning HTML, and so I'm filling up this field metrics with the answer. So it's just a direct call of the workflow getting the answer back. And so we have this. This is the workflow that I was just talking about. We call it with the email address as an input. The output, it's outputting two things. One is all the HTML, that is all the other snapshots put together in one output. And it's also getting all the JSON data. We're not going to concern ourselves with that aspect of it too much today. So when this runs, we go to our community website. We're using a server request action to call our community gets contact snapshot by email. So the API endpoint that's designated for that, we pass it an API key and an email address, and then we get our output back as the community snapshot. And then these things just process it to get it ready to display. And in the same way, this is the other call that's, in our case, happening 3 seconds later, where we're calling our console to do the same thing, get contact snapshot by email, and passing it the right key for that, and the email. So what I deleted out of here we'll be redeveloping, but that's the one that's going to be the Campfire. Okay, so that's a lot of talking. Now let's do stuff. So we'll be coming back to our CRM system and enhancing it once we have new stuff available. So here we are on Campfire, and we're going to build a workflow that answers the question, provides a snapshot. We're also going to build an API that returns that snapshot externally to a caller. Anybody that calls that an API endpoint and has security will be able to use it. And I'm choosing to do this as design-wise, I could just directly do it as an API, but I'm doing it as a workflow so that it can be called for other purposes. So anybody can call the workflow. An API is a workflow is a little bit cleaner to work with, nice inputs and outputs, and so it's just might be a common design pattern where you put things into a workflow and then call it from an API. So here we go. And this one that you're seeing here, that's the draft that we were calling inadvertently a little while ago. So before we build it, we're going to need to know what it is that we want to get out and how to get to it. All this is going to be done through SQL. And so, for example, one of the things that we're going to need is the user ID of the user. So I've got some prepared SQL here that we can just kind of run through the SQL console to see what we're doing. If we're starting with an email address, we can use the email address to get to the user ID, and that's really what we're going to want to do. And then we have one other piece of notice that the user ID in my particular case is 2. So the other one we're going to do is, and I'll format this a little bit so we can see it. We're going to get how many contributions were done by user 2, when the most recent contribution to the website was done, and when the first contribution was done. So all that's done by SQL. We can run this, and we find out that I've contributed 55 things. And the first time I did it was back in September of 21, and my most recent one was earlier this month. So this is the SQL that we're going to be putting into our workflow that's going to return that information. So I've already done the design work of where this data is coming from. We're just going to execute it. So let's get things going here. We're going to do a new workflow, and I'm not going to bother with namespaces at the moment, but the workflow is going to be called the get contact snapshot by email. This is the same that I'm doing in my other systems. Everything's nice and consistent. Not that it's required, but it helps me stay organized. On the input side, we're only going to input one thing, which is the email. And we can now add in version 126, we can add a description. So this is it's optional, but contact email address that you want to inquire about. And that's the only input that we're going to do. I'm going to flip right over to outputs right away because I already know what these are going to be. One output is going to be some JSON. I'm going to call it JSON output. And we'll add it here. And another one is going to be called HTML output. We'll add it here. And just to speed up development a little bit, I already know that I'm going to create a token in my process called JSON output. I'm going to create another token called HTML output. So we can, I'm going to output those things, and it's going to be necessary that I create them in order to get anything useful, but that's the plan. One of the things that again, to illustrate how quickly and in what order things are happening, I'm going to create a token at the start here called as of date. And I like to add titles and comments so that I can keep track of what I'm doing. But the as of date is going to be equal to, it's going to token name of as of date, and the value is going to be date from Unix. So that gives us that nice number of seconds based in Unix time. It doesn't really matter what the value is, but it just helps us understand what's happening and in what order. So we have that available to us. We've got as of date. But then in terms of actions, the first thing we want to do is that first SQL statement where we get the user ID that we care about. And I think that's probably still on my clipboard here, so I am going to get it there. So this is saying get the first record where the email address is dalewarner@com. Well, we want it to be dynamic, not tied to a particular, we want it to be tied to the user ID, the email that comes in. So I'm going to turn this into a parameter, email. So it's a SQL parameter, and so we're going to bind that SQL parameter to the input on this. So just so you're following along, this matches the input. It's saying it's getting the value from the input and passing it into the email parameter, so it makes it into the SQL statement. From a result standpoint, what I want to get out is the user ID. So I'm going to do that through the extract columns, and we'll get out a token called user ID. that's out of the query, and we're going to store it in a token. Sorry, this query is going to return a user ID, and so the column user ID is going to get stored as a token out of that one record. So that's how this SQL works. So this is going to give us a user ID, and oftentimes, let's see, I'll give a better description than this. It'll be something like save and test is your friend with this thing, and I like to save and test so to see if things are working the way I think they should before I spend all the time to take things to the end. So I'm going to create a temporary debug output, and in it I'm going to take the user ID and display it. So this is just going to prove to me that this works. By the way, we just encountered another enhancement in version 1.26. The save is now lightning fast. We had noticed that there was some CPU issues, and the larger your system got, the slower that the save on workflows was taking, and we spent considerable time and fixed that. So save and test are now going to run just incredibly fast. So I'm going to run this for my email address, and on the debug we're getting out the 2, so that's working. We haven't provided any content for JSON output, HTML output yet, so they're just providing default content. But at least this is working, so we can continue on. So the next thing that we're going to do, and I'm going to do this again by SQL using that other statement that I have, and probably is still on my clipboard. Yes, this, again, we'll format it to make it look nice, but we're pulling out 3 pieces of information where the create by equals 2. Well, we don't want to hard code that, so we're going to turn this into a parameter. Just to make it a little clearer how things wire together, I'm going to call it at create by. It doesn't matter what you call it, it only matters that you bind data to it. And so this matches this. Whatever parameter value we put here, we could put a 2, and it'll put a 2 into the SQL. Instead, we're going to say user ID. So the user ID we got in the last step is now feeding this SQL. And we're going to get some things out of this, and it's going to be the contribution count, the latest contribution date. I'm putting all these on my clipboard, first contribution date. So I can extract these columns, and so these columns are going to go somewhere. We just have to figure out where. And what I'm going to do is, I'm going to create new tokens called Campfire, and all of them are going to be prefixed with Campfire. You'll see why in a minute. But so we're going to create a token called Campfire contribution count, Campfire latest contribution date, Campfire first contribution date. So this gives us, so this query will run. These tokens will now have the value for whoever our email user ID was. And so now we have some nice output. Now we got to do something with this. Well, we're going to do 2 outputs. Remember, well, first is HTML output. So we're going to, what is it we want to do? Create or update a token. And we're going to create the HTML output. That way, just to make it clear, that's just a comment, but we are actually going to take this, and we're going to create the HTML output token. And so now this is, as I mentioned earlier, this is going to be HTML ready to go. And so I'm just going to create a div and put something into the div. And just going to start with a header. This is going to be the snapshot from Campfire. So we'll put that in big letters. And then the next thing that we're going to do is I'm going to use an unordered list. So we'll start a UL. You'll know the stuff you look at a HTML reference. So I've started and ended an unordered list, and so now I can put as much stuff in terms of LIs, list items, into this, and so I'll do that. Oh, I got it. Patrick, you're supposed to catch me when I do that stuff. Wrong order. So I can have an LI element with all the stuff that I want to put in here one at a time. So I'm going to put several things in, so I'll just leave some room. The first thing I want to do is say number of contributions, and we'll also show first contribution with some date and the latest some date. And so now I just need those tokens, and I didn't put them on my clipboard, so I'm going to go away and go get them. So these are the ones copied, so now I can paste them. So the number of contributions is going to be based on the token Campfire contribution count. This is going to be based on first contribution date. Latest contribution date. And then the last one I'm going to put in here is, as I said, I just want to show the as of date. We'll strip this out when we're not illustrating parallel gateways anymore. And so now that'll show us the nice time. So this is going to give us HTML output. And the other one that we want to do, and this is another nice feature of 126 Plant an App, is we can do an action called what's a JSON action here? Context to JSON object. This is going to create a nice array that we can pass back all the values. And so this is where we're going to get the JSON output. The prefix that we're going to use, every token that begins with Campfire is going to be included. And it's going to go to JSON output. So this is going to create a nice JSON object that doesn't have everything, just has Campfire stuff. So we're ready to save and test. And again, watch how fast this is. So we'll run it for the same guy here. And so now we see in our HTML output, we have this HTML, looks pretty good to me. Then for the JSON output, every token that begins with Campfire, there's one that's, I guess I could, as I sometimes do, we can put this into a nice JSON viewer so that we can see what it looks like. Give me a second and I'll do that. See it in a more structured way. So we have our JSON, it has the contribution count, contribution date. The SQL also returns some ISO and ISO date stuff, so we can choose from any of these when it's time to display. All right. So we're getting the output we want.
I just wanted to say I love that method of using the context JSON action.
I'm sorry.
That's I love that method of using the context to JSON object action. That's cool.
Yep.
I was wondering where you were going with the prefix on the tokens, but That's great.
Yes, since that action pays attention to prefixes, if you start thinking in terms of um, naming things that you're going to want to collect up later for some other purpose with a prefix, you can include multiple prefixes. If you had some campfire things and some community things, you can you could gather them all up into the same, and then there's an exclude if you want all the campfire things, but you didn't want the ones that were ISO, you could name them and they would not get added to it. So lots of flexibility that's here. There's a sister action that instead of creating a JSON object, it creates a JSON array. So if your plan is to iterate through your tokens, then maybe you want an array. And I think we've covered some of that before, but we'll not get lost today. So on our outputs, this debug output really isn't necessary anymore. We can get rid of that. And then we can, again, in 126, we have this description, which might be useful. And so this is the snapshot data elements. We'll describe what we're getting back here. So this is an HTML div for the snapshot. So we'll save it and test it one more time just to make sure that I didn't break anything here while I was showing stuff on our email address. And so now we no longer have that debug output we don't care about, and we're getting nice outputs. So this is the workflow that is acquiring our data, and it just is waiting to be consumed. We need an API. So let's jump over and do an API. This will go rather quickly. We're going to say it's a new API. So this is creating an endpoint that can be, let's make sure I'm in the right place here. Oh, I'm not. So what we're going to do is to create a endpoint, and we can call it anything we want. But again, for consistency with what I've been doing, we're going to call this the get contact snapshot by email API. It's going to be a get, so whoever calls it is going to have to call it with a get method. And we need input from whoever's calling us. We need the email so that we can call our workflow. But then our actions, we're only going to have two actions. One is call our workflow. So we'll add an action that get contact. All right, this looks like I'm going to save this and refresh. The presence of this may not have been detected, and I'm going to clear my cache to make sure. We created a workflow, APIs doesn't know about it yet, so I wanted to come back and by doing the clear cache, it will end up knowing about it. So if you ever run into that, nope. All right, where this is the one we're editing. Well, let's try again. So we want to add an action, and here's the one we just created. We're going to execute that workflow that we just created. I'll just point out that these I parameters have those descriptions that so for the input, we see now this is what's expecting here, the email address we want for the snapshot. This is going to return back the snapshot data elements. This is going to return back an HTML div. So it starts as you're consuming a workflow. It's starting to tell you what it is that you're going to get. All right, we want to pass the email coming from the input. We're going to get out two tokens, and I'm unimaginatively going to call them the same thing. And so now that we'll describe it here. snapshot workflow. We're now going to add a response, and the response that we're going to do is a new object as JSON. We're going to take the stuff that came back and we're going to pass it back. It's nice to provide a 200 code, which means success. That's the HTTP code for success. And the things that we're going to include in this new JSON object is the first one is going to be called a JSON output. So along the way, Jim asked the question, was the draft that appeared for a moment there a moment ago a temporary name? What was that? Well, Jim, that was my, hey, I did the work in advance of Low Code Cafe to make sure I wouldn't stumble. So that's what I called it, the draft. So it's just another API that's out there. It's not a new feature of the product. It's something you were never supposed to see. So we're taking things that came from that workflow and sending them as outputs in the JSON. So what does this look like if we save and test this thing and again provided an email address? It's going to run the workflow and produces. It took the JSON output. So there's our JSON is starting to get a little bit more complex, but we can view it here. No, it's the same thing. So there's two things. The JSON output got put in there, which is all of our JSON values, and the HTML output is put in there, and that's all the HTML values. So it's just ready to consume. So all this is working just fine. We've got it passed through. There's one more thing because this is an API. By default, security-wise, any of you could call this right now with an email address, and it would return back that innocuous information about contributions to the website. But we want to make sure this is secure. So I'm going to save and close this, go back to security, and we'll create I actually have already created a API key. It's this one right here. And don't worry, I'm going to change this after our program is reported. But there is it's called GTM snapshot, and so anybody that calls this, we're going to set it up so it has to use this key. So we'll go back to our endpoint and look at snapshot, and we're going to edit this one. And in the security section, we'll say that it's restricted to the API keys, and it has to have the GTM snapshot key in order to run. So this just keeps it from, as long as you keep your API key private, it will keep it from getting called. So we'll save and close on that. So now we have a system. Where are we in our map? Let's go back to that. We're here. We've got this done, and now we need to do this last segment where we include it in our CRM system to return back the information. We've let the system sit for a few minutes, so I'm going to refresh just so we have a good system. And I'm actually going to duplicate this and get it up on another screen so I can follow along there. All right, finally. So we have this empty spot here where what we want to do is we want to call the this new API. And so that is a server request action. There's a couple of different ones. I'm going to pick the server request. There's an experimental version as well, but I'm just going to do the standard server request. And what we're going to do is we want to get the community snapshot. Nope, we want to get the Campfire snapshot. And that's going to, the output then for that is going to be Campfire snapshot. So that's going to create a token when this runs. The place that we're going to call is this we can see it in our save and test area is one way to see it. So we're going to need to, this is the what we just developed. That's what we're going to call. And so we will put that URL here instead of the example one. We've got to pass it some stuff, so we need to pass it. We've already got that as part of this workflow, and we need to pass an API key. Equals something, and I put that on the clipboard a little while ago, so that this will get it, so it's going to run okay. And so the output is going to go into Campfire snapshot. So I'm going to space this out a little bit just so that you can we can see this is the next thing. The processing that we need to do is to get the we have to do a little parsing. Some stuff on my clipboard here. JSON and tokens, and what we're going to do a little cut. We're going to parse the Campfire snapshot into tokens. So we have Campfire snapshot that we're going to, that comes out of the last action. It's going to create a base token called camp snap, which we'll be able to use it to access the rest of what we want to do. So that's going to get the result in camp snap HTML output, and that's the one that we really need. So we'll save that, and I'm going to go to my output here and add, and it's actually, I never took it away. There's camp snap HTML output. So the HTML output of this one workflow brings together everything from community console and Campfire all in the same thing. And so this is where we're getting our output. So if I've done this correct, and we'll save this correctly, we should now be getting our result from Campfire. And then in the last 5 minutes, we'll drag this across. So I'm going to say get snapshot, and we'll do the parallel gateway part. It's the easy part. So we're running. It takes a little while for all these. In the interest of time, I'm going to take away everything that had to do with the bringing the information in from Campfire. I'll do that after this session ends, but so that just so that we can get it back to working and do the parallel gateway, I want to make sure you get to see the main thing. Notice this system hasn't been upgraded with that lightning fast workflow save, so But by the time you get version 126, everyone will have that. All right, one more time. We're going to refresh here. Get our snapshot. We'll see how long it takes. Took about 7 seconds to do those two things. So now we're going to put those two into parallel. In order to do that, I'm just going to create a copy of this workflow that we've already got working. And we're going to call this the parallel version. So that way we can do it both the old way and the new way and see that it really works. So we're going to rename this by email parallel. And save that. And so let's add our parallel gateway. It's a little bit cumbersome to get these edited, but we'll do it. So notice that you've always had an exclusive gateway where you could make a choice and go on one branch based on a condition. We now have the plus sign is the parallel gateway, and we'll add that here. And so now everything after this is going to get executed until we do a stop. And so we'll make a little bit of space here and we'll add an end gateway. And so now this is our parallel area. Everything that happens between here and here is going to all happen at the same time. So this is what's necessary to do community. We're going to now take these things that are needed to do console and get them moved into this parallel area as well. The way to do this, it's a little cumbersome, but you want to export and import them. There isn't a nice copy and paste. If you're tempted to use copy and paste, you're going to find it doesn't work the way you think it would, and then you're going to be unhappy. So we say export and copy that and import it and put it back in here. And we're going to do this third one as well. So exporting, importing instead of copying and pasting, but all these are done and we don't need them anymore. Here, we just got to wire them in. So we wire it here, here to here, here to here, and then into the merge. Clean things up a little bit. We'll drag our stuff back in here. So yeah, so now all these things are happening at the same time. We have our import, export, lost our comments. Patrick, take a note on that, please. But the functionality is still there. We're calling our APIs and doing that. So just by adding these into a parallel gateway split, we can save this and we can test it out. So do you love how I dragged it out for 50 minutes when the real money shot was 2 minutes worth of rearranging the workflow? All right. The old way took 7 seconds. We need to add we still have this snapshot form up. But since there's changes to it, the new workflow was created, we'll refresh it so that it knows about that. What we're going to do is clone the get snapshot button and use the new workflow instead of the old workflow. So we clone, and this is going to be called get snapshot parallel. We look at our actions, and instead of doing that one, we say add, we'll look for an action called parallel. Up here, it's the same thing, requires the same inputs. then we're going to get the same output, the metrics. And we'll no longer delete this. We'll delete that when we don't need it. So doing the same thing as whatever else it was doing before, but now we're using a different workflow with the same kind of capabilities. And I didn't work to make the screen pretty, but we'll get a new button here. We'll see how long it takes. Took about 3 seconds, and then if we follow it along, it started at 53. This one started at 53, and this one also started at 53. So even though these each take 3 seconds to get done, we're able to end at 56, or about 3 seconds. All right. This would be a great time to ask questions. So we got the slow version, and we got the parallel version. Those queries to those other servers are both happening at the same time under the parallel version. So this would be the spot where I normally end the recording, and you are welcome to hang on or wander away. But I'm going to wire in all that work that we did with the community, the Campfire, so that we have a Campfire section in our snapshot. So your call, but we do thank you for joining Low Code Cafe. We will be here on Friday for Low Code Campfire, and again 2 weeks from now with another great low code topic. So your call, hang on or not. But I'll keep talking because I can't stop. So we're going to try again to wire in, and we'll just do it here. I'm going to do the export and import on these existing actions, because I'm going to do essentially the same thing. So it's just a question of we'll get them into place here, and then we'll modify them.
Jim had a question that actually I was wondering about also. He's commenting that you're using the import and export here, but could you have just removed your connections and moved the actions that you have existing, and then connected them back to the parallel?
I think so. That is a great question, and the answer is yes, with care. I would make sure you had a good copy of the workflow and did that. I've been around our workflows too long, and some things, when you get outside the normal patterns, some things have been precarious in the past, and so I'm wary of them. But if you have a good backup, then yes, absolutely. Do you know differently, Patrick, or would you agree with that?
Yeah, I mean, a backup of the workflow is always a good idea, and that's just a matter of exporting the entire workflow. That's a good way to back it up. I think the key to it is that you disconnect it, so you completely remove the connection from the workflow, and then reconnect it to a different spot. I've done that before, but I agree with you, Dale, that it's good to be very careful. So, Jim, there's a very diplomatic answer to your question.
So we're calling server requests and get my comments going here. This is getting the Campfire snapshot. able to just copy and paste some of the stuff because it's the same pattern. I've already kind of thought through the logic of it, so it's just implementing it. So this is Camp Snap and put it into snapshot. And on our HTML, we need to create it. Directly retrieved the output from the Campfire snapshot. It should be available and just add it on to the end. So let's save it and go directly to test. Of course, it's only going to work in a parallel version if it works. And there we go. So number of contributions, we've got the first contribution date, last contribution as of, and from the time that it started to process, so 24, they all started processing at 24, and then it all ended at 28, so about 4 seconds. Run it again here. Yep, about 3 seconds. So definite. We got it to work. All right. So this was the scenario that now works, and this is a real project that I'm working on. We're going to add internally. We really do want a snapshot of what our customers are doing on the various systems. So I'll clean that up and remove things that are just illustrations, and then we'll have it internally to be able to get a nice holistic picture. So when I do a support ticket, I can see, for example, the organizations that you work for and what sites you have without having to navigate to several different screens. So that's our plan. So with that, can a parallel gateway feed into a second parallel gateway? Great question. What does that look like? I would say yes. I haven't actually tested it, but if you were to put a parallel gateway in here, we could, what would that look like? You should be able to put another start here and put things in the middle of it, and those processes in the middle would run while you're waiting, and then these next steps would have access to the result of the intermediate steps. Yes, I would say it would work. Try it. Let us know. Give a support ticket if you have trouble, but I fully expect that one to run. And again, it's just the same question. You kick off all these, however deep you set it, you're going to have a lot of processing all at one time. But if you need the result before you move on, that's a really good way to do it. Cool. Thanks for the question. All right, with that, we really come to the end, and we will see you again next time on the Low Code Cafe.